step up here. Y'all look good. We ought to have a group photograph taken. This may be the best you ever look. My name's Dick Anderson. I'm alcoholic. And I'm very grateful to be here tonight. I'm grateful to be any place, dressed up, clean, and in my right mind, because I almost missed Alcoholics Anonymous. But as I tell you my story, the reason that I didn't miss it was because of the service work that many people did to get me here. And that's really what my story is about. I want to thank Sandy for inviting me out here and allowing Barbara and I come to share this fellowship with you. And we've had a great time. We've met a lot of great people, some old friends, some new friends. But the people have just been absolutely spectacular. And I love it when alcoholics take care of other alcoholics. So I'm just grateful for that. And I thank Sandy again. I thank the committee. I thank Roman. Even the way in which we're treated when we came to the meeting last night, Shirley was making sure we had the right seat, and that kind of affection, that kind of love, one alcoholic for another, is not the way we lived before we came here, and I'm just very, very grateful for that. We also got the most beautiful basket, which was with a hand embroidered pillow that had the Serenity Prayer on it, and also just the dressing around the basket was embroidered with the logo of here. It's beautiful, beautiful work, and that was done. So I want to thank Miriam and Bertha and Marie for that work. They did a fantastic job, and I appreciate that. Before I get started, I do want to recognize I don't have my whole 3 generations of my family here, but I am from the Atlanta area, and I do have one of the guys I sponsor, and it's a long trip, and he's here. And Ken, would you stand up? And next to him is, and his son Eric is with him. Eric's a local, but they came, and I appreciate that support. I just gave Ken his 20-year chip earlier this year, so. I just want to, if you haven't listened to all the speakers, and I've missed a couple of them, but there have been some great speakers this weekend, and you've got another great one tomorrow. Marianne and I have had the privilege of being together a few times, and she gives a great talk. If you missed Ron last night, I had met Ron's brother Ralph earlier, and they both give great talks, and I talked with him in Amarillo, and we brought him out to Atlanta. Now we have to get Ron over there as well too, but he did make me a little bit nervous. I always get nervous when a guy starts telling me what he's wearing, and but I want to tell you. The difference between our stories indicates what's beautiful about Alcoholics Anonymous to me, because we're so different in our circumstances. We're different in the way we grew up. Some of us had tremendous problems we had to overcome, and some of us didn't. But we share the same feelings, because I had the same feelings as him. And I did not come from a family that was dysfunctional. My family is the kind of family that I want to have. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky. My father was a B-25 pilot during World War II, shot down, received the Army Cross. He got 2 Silver Stars in Korea after that. And he's the kind of man who would not even think of cheating on his income taxes. There's not a dishonest bone in his body. He took care of his parents. His father had tuberculosis, and he came out of Hopkinsville, Kentucky. He married my mother, who was a flight attendant during World War II for American Airlines, and they met at Bowman Field. Place right after the war, got married, and flew off to Acapulco for their honeymoon. And 9 months later, I was the gift that arrived. And I guarantee that what they had in mind was a much better life than the ones they came out of. My mom's father was a coal miner in Harlan County, Kentucky, and they were hard-working people, and they had a tough life. but she was as honest as can be. And my mom and dad are still healthy in their mid-80s, living in Louisville, Kentucky, married all this time, and they live a good, honest life. The family that I come from is not a family of wealth, but it's a family of honor. I just told you about my dad. My little sister's a retired bird colonel from the Army. Brother-in-law's a retired bird colonel. My nephew was a West Point grad who was a tank commander in Iraq. I've got 2 grand-nephews who are special ops that have been in and around Baghdad. I had 2 tours in Vietnam. We're a military family, and we were a family that served and a family that was willing to give our lives because of the belief system that we grew up with. And there was no drinking around our house very much anyway. When we had a family reunion, we'd have iced tea and we'd have lemonade and things like that, and I very rarely saw alcohol. So it wasn't part of what I grew up with. But like Ron was talking about, for some reason I felt like I did not fit in. And during my first 14 years, before I ever took a drink, this family that I was born into was kind. All the stuff that I went to, that I was involved in, that I was part of, taught me the same principles we have here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a member of Boy Scouts. I was a member of Little League. I was a member of the YMCA. I went to a church. I went to Vacation Bible School. Every place that I went, I was taught these values. And I remember the Boy Scout values. You know, and this is, for some reason, inside me, even I can remember at the age of 6, if you had asked me, I would have felt dishonest when I talked to you. I was hiding something when I was 6. The beauty of this program is that I have a sponsor that I can talk to, and I can share intimately with that man one-on-one. And I had nothing. I had no way to communicate. I could not talk to my dad. I couldn't talk to my scout leader. Couldn't talk to anybody else. And I remember the scale of performance that I was asked to live up to. And if you remember the Boy Scout, any of you who were Boy Scouts, in the handbook, it says we are trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. What an order. I couldn't go through with it. On my first inventory, which I did, and when I got to the program, I had brain damage. It took me about a little over a year to learn how to read again. But my first inventory, I didn't have a lot of stuff on there because I couldn't remember anything. But I remembered stealing a candy bar at Wish's Drugs when I was about 7 years old, because I was not given anything except the very best principles to live by. But for whatever reason, I couldn't do it. And that's the way I was from the time I was born until I was 14 years old. Now, I read a lot when I was a kid, and I would stay under the blankets at night and read, and when we got a television set, I started watching television. And the programs that I watched also espoused these kind of values. I was watching Ozzie and Harriet, the Andy Griffith Show, Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver. And in all of these shows, if Wally or Opie got off the beam someplace, by the end of the show, gently, without a lot of criticism, they were brought back on the beam. And I didn't relate at all in real life. I still have that problem. I'm very good at fantasy, but not real good at real life. But at this point in my life, I could feel like I was alive when those television shows came on. And when the television shows left, I felt ill at ease. I felt uncomfortable with real life. And that's the way I was. And all these shows were in black and white. But my value system and my moral compass was based on these television shows and these characters that I watched. And that's the way I lived for a while. My first spiritual experience was the first color film that I saw. That was at the drive-in in 1957 with my parents, and it was the 10 Commandments. And it was a screen that was 120 feet wide, and it was this absolutely fantastic movie, and the 10 Commandments, and in this film, I had never seen such power, and that's what was missing in my life. Lack of power is our dilemma. That's exactly where I was. I had no power, and in this film, Charlton Heston had this staff, and once he would move the staff, the entire Red Sea would open up. And I said, that is the kind of power I want. And I made two decisions that night after seeing that film. One, that I wanted to be on God's side because I had seen what Charlton Heston did to Yul Brynner. And two, I decided that I wanted to be around the film business. And I've made a living as a writer for the last 30 years. And my experience now, that spiritual awakening, and Clancy calls it a change of perspective, but now looking back, I see how God reached me wherever I was looking. That He knew where I was looking, and film was the place where He reached me the most. And so I had this experience, and I went down, and I got dipped and dunked at Linden Baptist Church, and I was all ready to go, but I didn't have anybody to talk to. I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't have what we have in this program. I made a decision, but I didn't have anybody to talk to. And so I continued living the same way I was, which was one scared little Baptist Boy Scout, and until I was 14, and then I had my second spiritual experience. Dave, my buddy, and I were playing Babe Ruth League baseball the next day, and his older brother got us a half pint of gin and a 6-pack of beer. I drank the beer, he drank the gin. And I felt for the first time exactly like I imagined Moses did when he was standing there with that staff. And when all the wind was going through his hair, and this power came into my life, and suddenly I felt tall, and I felt big, and I felt adult. And this kid that wouldn't say anything except yes sir and no sir and be very shy before suddenly felt powerful. And from the very beginning, I was not a stay-at-home drunk. I was a go-to-town drunk. And so if you're 14 and you're going to town, you're hitchhiking, and we hitchhiked up to a place called the White Castle. The White Castle is a place that looks like a little White Castle, and it's where you go when you're drunk, 3 o'clock in the morning, to eat those little square hamburgers with all the onions on them, which seem like a good idea when you're drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning. But I've been back sober, and they're a better idea when you're drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we go up to White Castle, and I am absolutely feeling no pain. I'm feeling no fear. The fear is removed. But my buddy Dave is not having the same experience, and Dave suddenly starts to feel a little woozy. Well, I had never had a cup of coffee either. But I had seen in Perry Mason where if you've had too much to drink, if you'll have a cup of coffee or two, it'll settle things down where you can talk to the police. Which was a good thing. So I ordered a cup of coffee from my buddy Dave. I didn't have one. I wasn't having the problem. And my buddy Dave had the cup of coffee, and it didn't have the desired effect. Shortly, Dave kind of threw up down this stainless steel counter. And if you're looking for a Louisville City policeman at midnight, the best place to find him, we found out, was at the White Castle. So 2 of them came down and said, what's the matter with your buddy? And I said, now, in the past, I would have been scared to death. I was a scared little kid. I said, there's nothing wrong with him. He just had a little bit too much to drink, and we're fine. And they said, well, how old is he? 14. How old are you? 14. So I was in Louisville City Jail 4 hours after I took my first drink. And that was pretty much the end of my social drinking. I drank as much as I could, whenever I could, wherever I could from that point on. And when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I would have told you that my drinking problem started during my last 2 years. During that time period, I had ceased to be able to function. I was living in a basement apartment, not paying my rent. I was going to the bathroom on myself. I was coming to, passing out, and living on the bathroom floor. And I was not having any food. I'd been bleeding from the stomach for some time. I was hallucinating. I was delusional. I spoke to people that weren't there. I had become I hadn't talked to my parents in maybe 2 years. I had lost a fiance. Even the people that I used to drink with who were alcoholic had stopped hanging around me. But here's what I did the first 3 times that I drank. The first time I get locked up, but I can't wait to go get another drink. The second time, and the first time was beer. The second time, an older fella got us somebody was 17, we were 14. He had an ID, ours IDs wouldn't even work. He got me something that I would not recommend to anybody. It was the date rape drug of the 60s, cherry vodka. And it was. I would not recommend it if you're going to slip. There are better things out there. And the third time, I settled into what I settled to for the rest of my drinking career, which was bourbon. And being from Kentucky, that was our state drink. State bird, state tree, state everything. And so the second thing that happened during that same 2-month time period, I was the quarterback on a JV football team. And I was dating the captain of the JV cheerleaders. Dating back then meaning we talked on the phone and went on hay rides. Different than 14-year-old dating now, but this was my girlfriend, and she told me that she did not want me to drink when we were going out because her father had a drinking problem and it was of concern to her. So I broke up with her. Now, these things happened within the first 2 months of my drinking. And anybody who knew anything about alcoholism could have told me and spotted it right then and there that I was alcoholic. It became the most important thing in my life. And this kid, who's in the advanced program, who was the apple of his parents' eyes, whose grandparents doted on him and wanted much for him and wanted a great life for him, who scored 1480 on his SATs and when he was a sophomore in high school and could have gotten into Brown or Harvard or any place else, barely got out of high school. I got arrested 6 times my senior year. I got arrested at my senior prom for 2 counts of assault on battery on a police officer. And even that, by that time I had started to romanticize my behavior, and also I was starting to believe in the benefits of my behavior. When I came in here, somebody told me that the problem with alcohol for an alcoholic was once you took that first drink, you never knew where you were going to end up. I thought that was the product benefit. And so this time, now when I was locked up at the Kentucky Derby, this is 2 counts of assault and battery on a police officer. That's a felony. I'm 18 years old. So this time I didn't go to juvenile or to the drunk tank. But there was more romance involved in it. At the same time we have the proms in Louisville, we also have the Kentucky Derby. And I was locked up, put in a felon tank. It was me and 7 other guys, the other 7 guys. And it was 7 Black Panthers who were in town and had been arrested because they brought a stash of explosives in to disrupt the Kentucky Derby. So it was in the felon tank were 7 Black Panthers and me in my little powder blue tuxedo jacket. And this made the national news. And, when they brought him out of the cell, there were these 7 Black Panthers looking at me, trotting out. And this became exciting. This drinking thing was more exciting than you think. Plus, I didn't get to go to things like that in Vacation Bible School. And it was a new experience as a writer. I thought I knew all about race relations. I went to high school that had 2 black kids, Charlie and Sharon Broadus. I was friends with them, so I thought everything was going fine. But there was a bigger world out there. So I got to meet these guys. And from that point on, I drank and started my daily drinking when I was in high school, junior, senior. And sometimes they weren't funny. And, of course, it wasn't funny when my parents got the call and were told that I was locked up for assault and battery on a police officer. But I disregarded how my behavior affected anybody, and I didn't care about it so long as I felt good while I was drinking. And I drank as much as I could, whenever I could, wherever I could, from that point on. I was in college. Another thing I learned early on was I would always quit. I could not make it. I would be a failure. I would have to stop whatever I was doing. And I had no permanent relationships. I'd have a girlfriend for a while. I knew that the alcohol would get rid of that girlfriend, and always the alcohol and the next step of my drinking were more important than whatever I was involved in. I went to the University of Kentucky. I played 1 year of football. I was an athlete. I had friends down there, and I didn't make it through. I didn't graduate because I was in ROTC. I come from this family, long line of military officers. I'm in ROTC, but I got drunk one night and I was drinking. We were reading Hemingway. We sat, we drank, we enlisted. So I went down and enlisted, and the next day, because that night while drinking, I didn't want to miss out on Vietnam. And I thought, my dad was in a war, I want to go, so I enlisted. I woke up the next morning with some very angry man yelling at me. Went to Vietnam. Had a good experience. I do well in crisis. I don't do well in real life. And I did fine for the most part while I was in Vietnam. But I discovered something else over there. I never saw a drug while I was at Kentucky. And now I had somebody to look down on. I felt if you did drugs, you lacked self-discipline. Now, I carried a bottle with me at any given time, even when we were on a helicopter in Vietnam. And I stayed looped most of the time. But I developed this, and I'm not saying that I didn't smoke a few joints or accidentally do LSD on a plane ride one time. But it was not part of my regular discipline. So I continued to watch movies. Movies affected my life drastically. The year that I got out of high school, I saw The Graduate 10 times. 2 weeks from now, I'm speaking up at Lake Tahoe. And my summer job when I was in Kentucky, we got through a buddy of mine, was at Lake Tahoe as a bellhop. Great job. And but right before I went to Lake Tahoe, I saw The Graduate 10 times. Now, I'd made it through school without smoking, so I started, after seeing The Graduate this many times, I started smoking and had an affair with an older woman. She'd be about 86 now. And she was at Lake Tahoe. She looked like Ava Gardner. She was at the front desk of this hotel. This is the first time I've been back in that territory, so we may have a reunion in a couple of weeks. But that's the way my life was. I would go to a movie, I'd see the character, I'd relate to the character, and that's exactly what I'd want to be part of. And then you wake up in boot camp, or you wake up someplace else, and it's not the same as in the movies. And I had trouble functioning, so I would go on. Now, I did okay in the military. I had 2 tours in Vietnam. I did better in combat than I did back here because of the rules. And I got out, and I was getting out, and I did what is described as geographic. It was my first time when I was actually going to settle down and I was going to get married and stuff. I had met a beautiful woman when I was on leave back in Louisville. And so I'm getting out of the service, and now we decide we're going to get married. We're making plans. We just have to figure out what to do with her husband. And he was an attorney for the Nixon administration. So we had some run-ins. I went after him a couple times with a shotgun, and he came after me with a subpoena. And so that was the other thing, is in the military you are trained with firearms. Now you've got alcohol and firearms, which are a wonderful combination. And so and that's the way I lived. And so I did, but you know how persistent alcoholics are, and so I persisted, and I did get them divorced, and we're getting married, and we send out the wedding invitations. I took a job. I had worked for Stars and Stripes and Armed Forces Press Service when I was in the service. Now I'm working for an ad agency, and I took this job. I'm settling down. I bought stock in the company. I mean, that's I'm settling. Everything's going to be okay. And then I failed to come home 2 or 3 nights in a row, and this woman sat down with me and said, you know, there's just something, you know, my father died of alcoholism, and here I hear the story again, and she said, you've got a problem. And so the way I dealt with that is we broke up immediately. It was 3 weeks before the wedding, and she had to return the wedding gifts. And I didn't think about that. What I thought about was, whenever anything failed in my life, I had another opportunity waiting that I was looking for. Well, in this case, the opportunity was, in Vietnam, they would give you nickel beer to get you to try certain beer. And I had seen Playboy magazine here in the United States, but I'd never seen Penthouse magazine. And Penthouse had something that Playboy didn't have. It had the form, it had letters section. And this was very interesting to us when we were sitting around over there in Vietnam. And so we're reading these letters, and there was a concept that they had called a menage a trois. And we didn't speak French at the time. We weren't even aware that we were in French Indochina at the time. But we were reading it, and the idea of 2 women and me just, well, for all of us, we all agreed this was a good idea. And the fact that we didn't have 1 woman at the time didn't seem to make any difference. But so I had kept this tucked in the back of my head, and at some point I'm going to see if I can try this. I'm going to realize this is something, you know, Hemingway tried everything. And so, you know, including shooting his mouth off later in life, but I wasn't focused on that part. And so I'm thinking, well, I'm going to try this. We break up. So within 2 days, I'm trying to find where I can find 2 women. And I said, you know, there was another concept in there. in this magazine that I didn't really understand apparently either, and there were letters about lesbians. And so I said, well, if I'm going to find two women that want to be with me, I should go to a lesbian bar. And if you're new, see me after, but they're not waiting on us. So I managed, this is Louisville, Kentucky, 60s. I lived in an apartment complex with 11 people. We all knew each other. We're all veterans. We're all, we all knew each other. Most of us went to high school together and so forth. And so just finding the place was difficult enough. I finally find this place, and I go down there. And there's a piano bar, and I'm sitting at the piano bar, and I'm sitting next to a woman, big woman, and we're getting along fine. But I know there's no menaging, but we're doing along fine. And I'm getting, as the night goes on, I'm getting sexier and sexier, and because being from Kentucky, it was also mandatory that you smoke, and I smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day at that time. And so I'm, and when you get that whiskey and those cigarettes, just at a certain point, you get that come hither voice, and it has to be. So I was ready, and and I'm hitting it off with this girl I'm drinking, and we're singing "Summertime" and these other drinking songs, and having a good time. But suddenly, the doors open upstairs, and there's this staircase that comes down, and the most beautiful redhead comes down, and it reminded me of the Loretta Young show, where she came down at the beginning of the show in this beautiful gown, and I'm looking, and here's this absolutely spectacular redhead coming down in a gown, and I don't remember us saying anything. I just remember, like the movies, we were moving in slow motion towards each other. We got to the middle of the dance floor. We're just holding each other. We're kissing, and I'm in love. And you know how when you're in love, you can't get enough of each other. It's just, and you'd make out for a little while, and you'd move over 5 feet this way, and then you'd just turn and have to make out again. And then I remember what I was there for, and I said, by the way, do you have a girlfriend to add to the party tonight? And her name was Erica, and she said, well, why don't we get to know each other tonight, and tomorrow we'll add somebody. I said, this is my kind of girl. Where have you been all my life? And so I'm ready, and we're going down 4th Street, and we're kissing, and we get back to my place. It's Saturday night, and on Sunday morning at my apartment complex, out of the 11 of us, whoever got up first popped the keg. We were out in the pool, and we played volleyball out in the pool. And if you had a stayover, you would bring her out and introduce her to all your alcoholic friends out there and see if she passed muster. And and this is one good-looking redhead. And so we get back to my place, and drugs rears its ugly head again. Erica pulled out a pill that was big enough to choke a horse, called a Quaalude, which I found out later was a horse tranquilizer, and said, would you care for one of these? I said, oh, no, I don't do drugs. So I took a few more hits of my Wild Turkey, and shortly, 2 things happened. Erica passed out, and I found some equipment that I definitely wasn't looking for. And after 3 or 4 days, I said, this is not right. This is the point at which my moral compass stopped working. I had never seen Opie or Wally ever deal with this in any episode. And it just got worse from that point on. And I was at this point I was working for this agency. Obviously the relationship with my fiance didn't work. I got fired from that job. That was one of 5 jobs I got fired from in a row. But before I got fired, I knew I was going to get fired, so I got another job, and I had a better job lined up. I was working with the biggest ad agency in the world up in New York City. So I go up there. Now I'm flying around, and I've got a production assistant whose primary job is to make sure I've got Wild Turkey 101 at any given time, even on a Sunday if we get into Dry County on a location. And I'm producing commercials, and I'm doing Coca-Cola commercials, and I've got Clios, and I'm the youngest creative director they have on the staff. And so my work, I'm doing well in my work. because they didn't care whether I was drunk or not. They just cared that I showed up to make the presentation and I got the commercial done, and that was it. And I managed somehow to do that when everything else was failing, when I wasn't dealing with what was going on with my family, when they couldn't find me for 5 days because my sister had almost been killed in an accident and was in ICU, and my parents were looking for me. During that time, nobody could find me. Nobody could pin me down except the people I worked with, and I was doing better, but not really. And physically, my body was starting to fall apart, and by this time, I'm drinking morning, noon, and night. And I was in a studio up in New York, and I'd fly on a Learjet, and I was staying out at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and I was staying at the Pierre, the Sherry Netherland, or the Plaza in New York, and they were paying for all this. And I'm up in New York, and I'm in a studio, and I go, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm recording music for Coca-Cola, and I start shaking, and I can't talk. And I'd seen another movie, The Lost Weekend with Ray Milland, and there's a scene in there where which came to mind because I had to leave that studio, and I walked out. I just left them there. And Coke's paying for all this, and I left them there, and I walked around the corner to a bar, and I walked in, and this guy sees me come in, and there's nobody else in the bar, and he pours me a triple whiskey, and I can't say anything, and I try to get it down, and I can't get it down, and I had seen Ray Milland take this towel and put it around his neck and bring it down to the drink so that he can just bring the drink and his mouth together, and that's what I did to get a drink down, and I was 25 years old, and I was this kid whose parents had all the dreams in the world, and I was starting to lose my physical ability to even know when I was going to be able to talk and not talk. And because I was being well paid and because of the job that I had, there were people covering for me. But I was drinking and drinking and drinking. And by this time, I'm not enjoying the drinking as much anymore, but I didn't know how to do without it. I couldn't stop. I'd thought about stopping. I'd had plenty of people talk to me about it, but I couldn't stop. And I ended up being on a boat out here in Marina del Rey with people that were in that you'd recognize, and I laughed too hard, and I went to the bathroom on myself, and I wasn't able to function anymore. And the guys I was drinking with started leaving me, and I got fired from that job. And I didn't get fired for the work that I did. I got fired for being drunk at a meeting and telling the president of Coca-Cola that with their attitude they would never go anyplace. You know how you have some anger and it just seems appropriate that you carry that out at some point in a meeting? And so, and they offered to send me to treatment. And I said, I don't have a problem. I've just, been having some problems recently with my love life. I didn't have any love life. And so, within that last 2 years, all I did was drink, pass out, come to, drink, pass out, come to. I knew I couldn't drive anymore. They gave me a big severance package, and that's what I used it for. And I ended up at the point where I was given my eviction notice. And if you haven't been evicted yet, they don't just come and say you're evicted tomorrow. They give you 45 days or 60 days. But for an alcoholic, that's never enough time. And so they had given me my eviction notice. And all I could do was all I thought about was that drink. And I was being sent out of the apartment the very next day. So I went up to the liquor store that night. And I would come to, and there was a time when I could come to, and I was shaken, but I could get up to the liquor store, and I had to get there and get a drink down and go back and drink until I passed out. And so I went up to the liquor store, and I walked in, and the guy says, hold on a minute. And the owner came out of the liquor store and said, we know this check is no good, and we know the last few checks you've written are no good. And we don't want you in this liquor store anymore. And as humiliating, as embarrassing as that was, the only thought that came into my mind was, God, I hope they're going to give me this bottle of whiskey. Because as long as I had the whiskey, I didn't worry about the fact that I couldn't write another check, and I had no money, and I was being evicted. As long as I had the whiskey, I was okay. And he did give me the bottle of whiskey. And I left, and I walked back to that apartment. And when I came around the corner, I hit something. And that bottle of whiskey went out of my arms and went down on that concrete patio and hit and broke and spilled all over the ground. And I felt more helpless at that moment than I ever did in a firefight in Vietnam. Because I had nothing I could do. I couldn't fight back. I knew I couldn't go get another drink because there was no place to go. And I went inside and I had a weapon and I put a bullet in the chamber. And I thought about writing a note, and I decided I didn't want to write a note because it didn't have anything to say to anybody. And I just started screaming at the top of my lungs at who I blamed for my whole mess for this whole period. And that was God. And I just started, God blanket, God blanket, God blanket. And I was screaming at the top of my lungs while I was just getting ready. And I had my hand right on the trigger, just getting ready to pull it. And all of a sudden I just broke and started crying. I said, God help me, God help me, God help me. God's gift to me at that moment was a moment of peace, and that scene from Days of Wine and Roses where Jack Klugman walks up to Jack Lemmon and says, I understand you need help. I'm from Alcoholics Anonymous. And let me tell you, why I do service work. Now, I've held just about every job you can have, from ashtray guy to delegate. The reason that I do service work, the reason I go to speak to DUI schools regularly, and I tell you, they don't give you standing ovation at DUI schools. The reason that I go and do that is because of all of the work and all of the thoughtfulness and all of the dedication that it took to get the message to me, so I didn't have to pull the trigger when it was my day. This guy named J.P., last initial M, who wrote Days of Wine and Roses, was a member of our fellowship, and he had coordinated that film with GSO. And that was a living, breathing AA meeting. And I must have seen it 30 times drunk. And it carried the message to me. And when I came back from Vietnam, I was required to go to a mandatory drug abuse seminar. And this Marine gunny and I sat in the back of the room with our sunglasses on, back from Nam, and we had a few shooters. You got to have a few shooters before you go to a mandatory drug abuse seminar. And we go over there and we sit in the back of the room, and I was expecting a lecture, and instead it was a guy named Charles. And he said, my name is Charles, and I'm an alcoholic, but I don't drink anymore because I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was an outside speaker, just a guy like you and me who was going to do outside speaking, and that had been coordinated by an intergroup or by an area office or by someone on a PI committee. And this girl that I was engaged to, suddenly, at some point, started distributing AA literature around because her mother ended up being the first nursing director at a treatment center there in Louisville, and someone on a committee had created those, the 20 questions, all of the pamphlets that were put out. And late at night, when I was drunk and I was watching these old movies, there would be a public announcement, a PSA announcement on there at night. And I would see that. And over and over and over, the work that you did, the work that you did on your committees, the work that you did in service work, the work that you did to carry the message to the person who's not at our meetings, saved my life. Because if you hadn't done that, I would have pulled the trigger. I wouldn't have known there was a way out. So sometimes when you're in the middle of a meeting where people are arguing and you think it has nothing to do with alcoholism, it has everything to do with alcoholism. Carrying the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And you did that for me, and you saved my life. And there's no way for me to repay that. Now, I picked up the phone after all of this, and I walk up to a phone booth on a street corner because I have no place to go, and it's me in a pair of pants that I had soiled, and which were kind of a yellowish-brown golf pants that I wore all the time, and I bought them for that particular color because they were very practical. And so I had this pair of pants on, and I walk up to this phone booth on a street corner, and I called the operator, and I said, can you connect me with Alcoholics Anonymous? And because AA had done a good enough job in making sure people who knew who we were. She knew about Alcoholics Anonymous. She said, hold on just a minute. She connected me with central office in Atlanta. And a woman named Helen answered the phone. And Helen R. And she was the head of the central office then. She's the head of the central office now. And I've been sober for 27 years. I'm 54. More than half my life has been as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Helen said, you wait right there. And what I didn't get was a recording. I didn't get somebody telling me, we'll send you some literature. I didn't get somebody telling me where the meetings were. I got somebody saying, honey, you wait right there. We're going to have somebody come and talk to you about Alcoholics Anonymous. And a guy named Ed, who came out, who was not hip. I was hip. Ed was not hip. Ed came out. Ed had a bad toupee and a pipe, and he worked for the railroad. And you know, I may be having a little bit of trouble, but I had been, staying at the Beverly Hills, and Ed came out, and while I had a gun in my lap, he sat and talked to me, and he did as the big book says. He shared the horrors of his past with me in a way that I could believe him. If he had told me I had to do something or there was something wrong with me, I wouldn't be here. But he had read the big book, and he knew how to do a 12-step call on a wet drunk, and he gave that gift to me. And I did the most complete first, second, and third step I've ever done in my whole life with him that night. I turned me over to him. He did suggest we get rid of the firearm. And he took me to a place to dry out. And this place was a new place, and it was before everything got specialized, and everybody that worked there was a recovered drunk. Conway and Joe H. and people like that. And I was having DTs. And Joe H., who's probably the ugliest man I've ever met in Alcoholics Anonymous, came in, and he was this little guy, and he said, "Hey, Big Shot, how you doing?" And he called everybody Big Shot. And at the time, I wasn't really dealing with a high ego. But he said, "Hey, Big Shot, how you doing?" And I started going into hallucinations and DTs, and I had DTs for about 4 days. And he would come, and he would just put his hand on my arm. And if you're dealing with a wet drunk and they've got the DTs, if you'll just touch them, that stops the DTs. That stops the hallucinations. And so Joe would do that for me. And these were guys, from the very beginning, I had no idea what I was doing there. I just knew I couldn't live, and I turned my entire life over to these guys. And not one of them has ever failed me in the 27 years that I've been here. None of the people that I followed have ever failed me. Alcoholics has never, ever failed me. If you're new and you're here and you think, and they tell you that a slip is part of the program, it doesn't have to be. Because I have not had a desire for a drink since June the 8th, 1977, when I walked in here. And I was a person who could not go more than a day without a drink, and barely then. And I have had no desire from the time I got here until now. And I had nothing. I had a car, I'd get in this place, and they picked out a sponsor. I was going back to Louisville, Kentucky, my hometown, and they selected a sponsor for me, an old railroad man named Jack Sullivan. And Jack used to be out and speak, and Jack was a pretty straightforward guy. And Jack never told me to shut up. Well, for one thing, I went to nothing but speaker meetings, so nobody had to tell me to shut up during the meeting because somebody else was speaking, and we had our discussions after the speaker meeting. But I got up there, and Jack said, "You're going to this meeting tonight. You're going to meet Harry, and he's going to introduce you to Sonny." And then suddenly I had this whole family of men that were looking out for me, Carter and Mikey and all these people that were the old timers. And they took me with them every place they went. Now, I had brain damage. It took me over a year to learn how to read, so I couldn't write. I couldn't make a living. I was pouring coffee at a clubhouse. And my first job in Alcoholics Anonymous in my home group was a men's 12 and 12 group. It was the one group I went to that wasn't a speaker meeting. And in it, we read the 12 and 12 and the big book on the steps. And if you had worked the steps, you could share your experience. If you hadn't, you could ask a question, but there was no philosophy during the meeting. And so, and I never realized what a great foundation I was given, because that's basic AA. I wasn't sitting talking about my problems or anything else. I was here in recovery. And these guys gave that to me. And every night we went to Howard Johnson's after the meeting, and they took the time to take me to Howard Johnson's. And I couldn't understand what they were saying. I asked the same questions over and over, and I cried at inappropriate times. And you know how I did, because I didn't know what was funny and and sometimes it would be funny to everybody else, and 10 minutes later I'm laughing. And that was the way I was. But these people were patient with me, and nobody ever told me that you're an idiot, you're stupid, we can't deal with you, why don't you go someplace else? They said they always invited me. It was like they were glad to see me. And they kept me with them the whole time. And this is why I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and why I do the things that I do. And so I'm following Jack, and I'm following these guys. And after I had been sober, they had me work through the 12 steps as best I could during the first 30 days. And as I mentioned, I only had 1 or 2 resentments. So obviously the brain wasn't kicking in yet. And within about a year and a half, my brain had started working again. And actually, I was a very good member while I was brain dead. But once my brain started working, I started having problems with Alcoholics Anonymous, because I started having questions about why we did this and why. And so, at this point, several things happened, but I had my first real root cause inventory. And I realized I'd been walking around with a chip on my shoulder for a long time, because when I got down to the resentments, I hated God, I hated Jesus Christ, I hated the church, I hated all the people who were in the church, who were happy, who didn't want to see me when I was drunk. I was mad at my father, I was mad at my mother, I was mad at just about everybody. I was mad at all these women that I'd run around, spent all my time chasing. Despite the Erica story, I am a flaming heterosexual. And so, and I was angry at all the guys who had more money or who were tougher or who were better looking, who got all the girls. I was angry at everybody. I had a chip on my shoulder. There was no way I could be happy with life. And so I dealt with this, and then I started making amends. And that's where the real progress started to come in. And they sent me out. And the first amend that I remember I had to make out of fear of sponsor was going to this Baptist church and apologizing on a Sunday night to a Baptist church for calling them all hypocrites for all this time, and asked them, and I was told that making amends means making a change. So I apologized to this Baptist church on a Sunday night. I'm asking them if I can be a member there for a couple of years, and two things happened. One, the wall fell. Whatever fear I had of any God that was out there was taken away, because I was free to go in any place, because I suddenly realized that I was a child of God like anybody else. And the second thing that happened, this was about 2 years into the program, I had been working my own program to find a significant other. And mostly that consisted of meeting somebody at a program, finding romance, and we had very good romance the first night. The second night was pretty good, and the third night we were taking each other's inventory and screaming at each other, and we had to start going to separate meetings so that we wouldn't run into each other. So I had kind of turned this over to God, and I said, God, if you have somebody else you want me to meet, introduce me. And my sponsor had told me that if I could find somebody to go out with, I could go out with them. And so I'm in there, and that night, while I'm making a ninth step to a Baptist church, there was a girl sitting there who, this sweet little blonde girl who had never seen anybody apologize to a Baptist church before. And that girl and I will celebrate 20 years of marriage in about 3 weeks. That's my wife, Barbara. So I tell the guys that I'm working with that if you're looking for a wife who will be faithful, who will share your interests, who God knows will be a good partner for you, who will love you, who will share the values that you have, try working a ninth step, not a 13th step. And that has worked for most of the guys I know who have tried it, because that was somebody I could not find on my own. Barbara, and this is how my God is extremely smart. My God ended up, Barbara had no alcoholism in her family when we met. Because I asked her, I said, most people that would go out with me might have some alcoholism in their family. And as it turns out, all four of her grandparents were alcoholic, and she's a past Al-Anon delegate. Obviously, she got caught onto it and got involved in the program at some point. But it saved her life. And when we first started dating, I didn't realize she was suicidal and that she had a lot of problems going on because she had not known about the alcoholism in her family. God gave me to her and gave her to me. And we have a wonderful relationship, and we work the program separately, and we enjoy our life together. That's because God worked that out. And I went back to this McCann Erickson, this agency I worked for in New York, and I go to the comptroller, and her name is Hartmus, and we called her Heartless because she was so tough on everybody. And I'm going to make amends to them, and I'm scared to death because I'm thinking I'm going to prison. And I said, while I was here, and my sponsor tells me that when you take money on an expense account that you don't pay back, that's called stealing, not finessing your expense account. And I said, I probably stole $30,000 on my expense account. And I didn't get the reaction that I thought I was going to get. This woman started crying. And she said, did you know that there were a group of us who knew you were in trouble, and we had been praying for you? And the big book says, suddenly we realized that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And that happened over and over and over. And I keep making amends, and I finally go back to this little church that I'd been to when I was in high school, and I went down, and I couldn't find anybody to turn myself into or apologize to. And I realized what I was really there for was to apologize to God, to forgive God, because I'd been so angry at God for so many years. And I had the first what I really call a spiritual experience that day where I just felt absolutely free. It was the first time I had no hate, no anger, no fear in my life. I just felt free. I felt like I weighed nothing. And I walked out of there a free man. I've not had any knots in my stomach about taking a drink from that day until then. And that was the result of the first 9 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. But the guys I ran with said that the old-timers suggest we do an annual house cleaning. And so I went with them to a place called Gethsemane near Louisville where we did an annual house cleaning. And at Gethsemane, we go out there and there were 12 guys. And we go in, and if I didn't like the Baptists, I really didn't like the Catholics because they had even more rules and they wore hats and stuff. And so I'm at Gethsemane, and this priest comes up to us, and I was there with some old-timers, and he says, "Do you guys know what God's will is?" And now I had my spiritual awakening. I see that I'm a child of God. I see that I'm okay, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what God's will is for me. And he said, it's simple. God's will is to do the best you can with what you've got. If you're a father, be a good father. If you're a brother, be a good brother. If you're a member of this program because God got you sober, you should be grateful and be the best member you can possibly be. And a little light went on. Because my whole life had been built on cocktail napkin economics, where I would write down, if I want that girl, I need to get this car. In order to get this car, I need to get this job. And I manipulated everything so I could get something for me. And now he's telling me that my job is just to do the best I can, one day at a time, with what I've got right now. That means I don't need to borrow all this money to get something. I can do something with what I have right this minute. He says, if you've got a job that you hate, do that job with honor and love, and help people through that job until God gives you something else. If you've got a job that you love, do that job with honor and love until God gives you something else. And the light went on. And then he started talking. He said, you guys have got sons. He said, if you had 2 sons, and they were both 7 years old, and you gave both of them little red wagons, and one of them takes the red wagon around the neighborhood and brings joy to all the kids he's with, and the other one takes the red wagon and sets it aside and says, I want a scooter, who are you going to give more to? And the light went on. When I'm grateful for what I've got and for who I'm with and for what God has given me, and I look at my own gifts and try to use them for somebody else, then I have found my purpose. And the Big Book says our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be maximum service to God and the people about us. Now that requires humility, which I obviously didn't have. And since then, that humility has changed in its nature for me. Humility, I thought, was being like Sergeant York in the films where you're meek and you walk around with your head down. It's finding out what I'm good at, finding out what I'm weak in, letting other people cover that area, and then where none of us can take care of it, we turn it over to God, because the Big Book says that God has all power. And it was that simple. And that day with this priest at that gathering, this last December, I was back in Louisville, Kentucky at that meeting. And sitting in that meeting were 16 guys with between 30 and 42 years of sobriety. Not one of the guys that I was involved in that kind of life with has ever taken a drink. Jack died sober. Every one of those guys is either still sober or they died sober. And that, I believe, is because they continue to work a house cleaning and they continue to grow and they continue to lead me. And I left there, and my sponsors in Atlanta, I've had 2 of them. Bill R., who's got 47 years, and John H., who spoke out here last at the San Diego Roundup this year, who has 45. And I've seen both of them grow. When they spoke at my 25th birthday, Bill talked about when he was 17 years sober trying to figure out how he could get rid of his wife so he could have an affair. But that day, he felt it was an honor for him to be there changing his wife's diapers because she has Alzheimer's. And when he's not doing that, he goes to nursing homes and places where he visits with people who have more problems than him. And he's 83. Those are the guys I follow. And if I keep following them, I'll keep growing. And if I keep growing, I don't get bored. And I don't start working on myself. I did that at one point. When I was 12 years sober, I decided I needed some time for me. And so I had been very involved in service work. When I was 12 years sober, I got away from it. And then people who were asking me to sponsor got away from me. And before long, I had gotten rid of a lot of my commitments. And within 3 years, I was so depressed that I was considering suicide. And I started over. And my sponsor had me do the same thing, go to 90 meetings in 90 days and do a thorough house cleaning and start over. And from that time until now, things have been nothing but better and better and better. And I don't mean things. I mean inside, my power, my ability to deal with situations. 3 years ago, right after 9/11, I went into the hospital with kidney stones. And I did have a kidney stone. And they put me in and they did an operation. And 2 days later I was worse. And they did another operation. And 4 days later I was worse. And they did another operation. After 7 days in the hospital, they did a CAT scan and realized that I'd had a ruptured appendix the same day I had a kidney stone. So by now I've had peritonitis for 7 days. I have 105-degree fever. And I've got liver failure. And my heart's starting to fail. And I've had 3 strokes. And they tell my wife to call the family in to say goodbye. I've got less than a 5% chance of making it. But God's will for me was to do the best I could with what I had. And Barbara got on the phone, and within a short time period, and on the internet within a short time period, there were people praying for us in about 20 different states. And it wasn't my time to go. And I was in that hospital for 2 months. And I had people coming in and holding my hand. I had guys that I sponsored, and John and Bill and people that sponsored me coming in and staying with me. And that's the way this program is, and Barbara was surrounded by Al-Anon. And when I held her hand that day, I had no fear. And the reason I had no fear was because I talked to Jack Sullivan the day he walked out of a hospital, and they had told him he had 6 malignant brain tumors. And what he was telling me, I was calling him to get him to come. He was coming to speak for us at the Atlanta Roundup. And Jack said, I'm not going to be able to do it. We need to get you a replacement. And he was concerned about me, and I said, why not? And he told me. And I said, well, isn't that serious? And he said, yeah. He says, I'm not going to make it. I'm going on. And Jack had no fear, and he had no resentment, because he told me that if God had taken care of him all this time here, he was looking forward to what God had in mind for him on the next place. And I lost my fear of death. And when that day, when they told me that I might not make it, I took Barbara's hand and I held it. And I said, whatever God's got in mind, he loves us and he got us sober and he got us into this program and he brought us together. And if I see you on the other side, great. And if he brings me back, great. But you're going to be okay no matter what, because God loves us and we've got AA and Al-Anon. It wasn't my time. But what that did for me more than anything else was take away the fear. And there is nothing in this world that I have wanted out of life that hasn't been prevented by my own fear or lack of humility. And now that I know what I'm good at, it's primarily the fear. And this fear was gone. This kid who was one scared little Baptist Boy Scout all his life had lost his fear of death. And that was given to me as a result of being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. That was the only thing preventing me from having the life that I wanted. And Barbara and I, since that time, I wasn't speaking at conferences a lot. And in the last 3 years, suddenly it's just popped up and we've been speaking as much as we can handle. And I'm delegate right now in Georgia, and I wasn't planning on that. So there were any number of things that God wanted me to do that I would have missed out on, but it was not my time. And I will tell you this. When I spoke in Louisville when you had your first birthday, they try to get you to speak as soon as possible after your first birthday. And a guy named Mike England and some other people came up after it and said, look, there's a lot more to this program than just not drinking. And that's our theme, sobriety and more. They said, if you've got dreams, if you will work the steps and you will stay in here and you do the best you can to live these principles, you can realize whatever dreams are in your heart once you find them. And I'm so glad they told me that. That's what I wish for you, is that you find your dreams in this program, because if you're here and you think it's just about not taking a drink, there's a lot more to it. Thank you.